Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Art Lounge Alley. This is the project stream part 73, and this is what the current project is. This is a favorite painting of mine. It is of Socrates. It's Death of Socrates, done by Jacques-Louis David. He's one of my favorite painters, French painter. And it's showing the moment where Socrates accepts his death. He's being handed a cup of hemlock, a poison, by one of his followers, by one of the people that admire him, because a bunch of fascists told him that he can't question things and it's causing a disturbance. And basically, this is just like a summarized version of it. Socrates said, well, if I cannot examine life, if I cannot question things, and which leaves me incapable of attaining truth, no matter what the situation is, it is a life not worth not living. And it was just this like really important moment in human history, I guess, in our development, in our evolution, just how important it is to question things. I mean, it's so vital that this person was willing to kill himself as a message for the rest of the world to remember, like, you should always be allowed to question reality and question whatever it is that you feel like. That is your freedom. That is incredibly important for figuring out new realities, new avenues of life. You know, if it wasn't for the idea of questioning things, we probably wouldn't go as far as we did in science. You know, if people never questioned, how is it that there's rain? You know, what causes rain? How does that happen? You know, that we probably would still be stuck in the Middle Ages. People not really knowing anything about any of this stuff and absolutely having no progress at all whatsoever. So I'm just going to continue working on Plato here. This is where I left off last time. And Plato was one of Socrates' biggest admirers. They were friends. Plato wrote about him. Some argue, I mean, this is the controversy, supposedly, that there was no Socrates, that it was actually Plato, and Plato wrote a lot of the stuff as like as a way of like telling stories using this character named Socrates. But that's debatable. There's evidence showing otherwise. There are even statues with his face, with the face of Socrates. But it's just an interesting idea. And this method is very different, I'm going to say, from... Whoops, way too dark. From drawing. Because you're using lines, whereas with painting, it's just using like big shapes and blocks of paint. You know, I'm going to say blocks, but it's just a more simplified way to say. Using some sort of liquid form, or not even liquid form, just like mass shapes. The goal here is to make it as accurate as possible. That's like the purpose of it. To learn, to improve hand-eye coordination, to improve attention to detail, a lot of that stuff. And something, I guess, that's common from this process and drawing, some things that I was talking about, is the idea of using placeholders. So a lot of the stuff that you're seeing, they're placeholders. They're not meant to be the final position for things. I just kind of use that as a way to like start somewhere. One of the things that I'm looking to learn here is folding, like folds that you see in clothes. There's so much to learn here. Absolutely, I wouldn't even know where to begin talking about like all the things that are available here to learn from. But I guess at the moment I'm just going to focus on making sure all the features are in the right places and it's proportionate to everything else. So there was something that I actually wanted to talk about today, which is what today is. Today is a national holiday. Today is supposed to be Thanksgiving. Now, I don't really have anything against celebrating together as family or as loved ones or whatever it is, whatever your group of people that you like to spend time with and have a reason to actually get together, show appreciation, connect, get closer. That's great. But what I don't agree with is the false amount of information about it. There are things that a lot of people don't know about this holiday, which is that it's based on something that happened in history with the indigenous people. It wasn't really like in 1621, it wasn't this like nice event of people coming together and really showing appreciation for the indigenous people or Americans, like Indian, what we would refer to as Indian people. They were Americans. They lived in the Americas. Now, the interesting story is it starts with a man named Tequanta. Tequantus was a Native American, and he was actually kidnapped and enslaved and sent to Spain, where he was enslaved throughout the entire point, and eventually he made his way to England, and then he made his way back to America. Tequantus came back to his village, what he found out was the village was completely wiped out, and there was like a pandemic that happened. And what the theory is that that pandemic really came from the separatists, the people, the colonists. They came from the boat. There were all sorts of conditions. There was also all sorts of things that were brought in from Europe, and it created this like plague that wiped out the entire village. And he was the sole survivor, basically, of that village that he was from. And the settlers were also, they didn't know what to do. They were at a point where everything was brand new, and one of the chiefs, I guess, of that indigenous or Native American tribe asked Tequantus to be like a mitigator, basically a diplomat, and They communicated with each other. The Native Americans communicated with the settlers, and they supposedly, this is what records show, this is what the history of it is, they taught the settlers how to grow their crops, grow corn, because a lot of the seeds that they brought from Europe weren't working. So yeah, the Native Americans basically helped them and gave them an opportunity to survive the plague, to survive famine, and all this other stuff. And then what ended up happening was a lot of displacement, ethnic cleansing. They're wiping away a lot of these Native Americans, and they actually forced them out of their home environment. It was like forced displacement. So now I'm not going to say that was everybody. I'm sure that there was a division. There was all sorts of politics that were in play. There were people who were incredibly rotten who did all those things, and there were people who weren't. So it was, I'm sure it was a mixed bag. But whatever it is, I don't think that the actions of people in history have anything to do with the people now. I don't think that it's all people who identify themselves as that or that, those kind of people. And I don't see it that way. I leave history where it was. Like, those people were part of that history, were part of that time. They were awful people. There's still people like that who exist now. Absolutely. There's still these sick, crazy people who are racist and just nasty, basically. How do you do that to somebody who basically taught you how to survive and welcomed you in, and then you just create genocide and wipe them out and displace them and basically kick them out of their own home? That's pretty repulsive. But yeah, again, I don't think that that's a definition of an entire people up to this day. I think that's ridiculous, and I think that's one of the problems of identifying yourself as something like, I am this kind of, I am an Asian person, I am a black person, I am an American person, or whatever it is. You're really labeling yourself to be something, and when that group of people, whatever it is, they end up doing terrible things, then people start to generalize you within that group, and that's a problem. That's something that I don't think is right. It's absolutely wrong. I personally identify myself as a person. That's pretty much it. That's where it starts and that's where it ends. I'm a person living on this planet, and I don't think that I'm going to stand for a group of people who might end up doing terrible things or might end up doing great things, whatever it is. They don't represent me. I'm my own person. I'm a person who uses my own sense of judgment based off of situations. I use logic and reason and morality to really guide through things. I don't say, I'm just going to do what everybody else does that considers themselves to be Asian, or considers themselves to be American or black or whatever. I'm just going to judge things based off of my understanding of those scenarios. And a lot of times it just becomes propaganda, becomes this thing where people are like, if you identify yourself as that, why don't you support us? And you never know where those groups get, which is what politics becomes. People start to identify themselves as I'm Republican, I'm Democrat, or whatever else, and they stop using their conscience, basically, or they stop using any form of reasoning or logic or any of that stuff, and they just start backing this culture that they identify as. That's my identity. I am this person now. It's a blockade. It becomes senseless almost. People start backing and supporting things senselessly because of this idea. This tribalism kind of. I think if more and more people were to just identify themselves as human and just end it there, and you could do things like, I consider myself an artist, but that is or, a musician or a historian or whatever. But those are just titles to say I have these interests. They don't mean all these other things that are attached as do like political parties or whatever else, or like ethnic parties, like I'm this kind of person, or so on and so forth. Not that I'm saying differences are bad, or whatever. That's not the point. It's just that group identity becomes dangerous at some point, as you could see, where people really start to hate anybody outside of that group identity. If it comes to like individualistic identity, it's fine. There's no real harm to it, because you're just responsible for yourself. Whatever it is that you choose to see yourself as. I'm a construction worker, whatever it is. The only person who's responsible for the actions of you is you. Whereas if you identify yourself as that, and you're going to say, I represent all black people, I represent all white people, I represent all Asian people, it becomes a problem. Because if you become corrupt, and if you start doing terrible things, well, now a lot of people are going to start labeling people who support that as corrupt, and so on and so forth. It becomes a problem. And now you're like lumped in with everybody who's doing these terrible things, when you might not even have that sort of perspective, or it might not even, or don't share, or you condone it, you don't agree with it. So it becomes problematic. But yeah, just bringing it back to what I was talking about, is that there's a lot of things that people do in history that are awful, that are terrible. But to say that, anybody who identifies themselves as that group that did terrible things is just as bad, I don't agree with that. It's a generalization, and in fact, I just don't agree with any generalizations. Most of the time they're false. Not always. But yeah, I think it's important to know what really happened. I think it's rotten to not basically acknowledge the terrible things that have happened to people, and for people to be totally ignorant about, the history of things, because it's important to learn from that. There's morality to those stories, like what not to do, which is basically, don't backstab people who helped you there, and just completely ruin them, basically. I don't think, sure, you might not want to connect anymore, or you have differences in opinion or whatever, that's one thing. But to displace and then, pillage entire groups and then toss them out, I don't agree with that. And from what it sounds like, from just history, a lot of them were very peaceful and considerate people. So that's even worse. You're doing those terrible things to peaceful, considerate people out of this fascist sort of reality that you came from, which was about competing and, superior, inferior, survival of the fittest or whatever. That garbage, that Nazi shit, basically. All that started from, that section, really. The whole superior, inferior, the colonization theory is something that's beyond the Nazi era. That wasn't just during that World War II. This is something that didn't happen. It didn't happen overnight. It wasn't just one day all of a sudden people started believing in this idea. This is generations, This is generations of people who were just continuously conditioned to believe those things. They were educated in that light. This is what they were taught in universities at the time, and it just continued to go in that trajectory. People didn't challenge it and didn't say, hey, this is totally wrong. It's breeding sociopathic behavior. It's breeding narcissism, where people think that they're entitled to things because of, this idiotic concept of let's say, appearance, like, oh, their jawline is like this, and it's similar to so on and so forth, like these superficial, idiotic concepts that people felt like they had the right to like displace, kill, murder, rape, or whatever people who didn't have the features that they wanted or admired or whatever. It's insane. It's absolutely crazy. But yeah, just a quick note there that colonization theory is responsible for, you know, the whole like Nazi regime and like the whole value system that has spawned from that, or was backed by it. That's its origins. You know, that's where it really came from. And colonization was something that's been going on for like years, basically, and centuries, not even. You know, it wasn't just during the American Revolution and the years prior to that. It wasn't just like the 1400s, or it goes way back. And it's just basically stemming from people who are sick, who are mentally sick. And they have like delusional grandeur, and they oppress a bunch of people in order to continue to be brats, basically. You know, do and say whatever they want, act however they want, and do terrible things to people because they're brats. But yeah, just, you know, talking about all this stuff, I think it's just really important. And I don't think that you need to have this tradition in order to appreciate other people, you know, or to spend time with them or whatever else. Like you could do that, and you can create your own days where you guys get together and you know, share all these things. Even as communities, you guys can establish that as well, without having to rely on it. Or you could just change the value system, change like how that holiday is looked at and celebrated in a different way that still incorporates like connecting with people and showing appreciation and value and so forth. If the truth is taught about it, you know, and if we just change certain things around, we could still maintain the holiday, but in a better direction. And some people argue like, oh, that's tradition, but there's a lot of things that we used to do that used to be tradition that's absolutely appalling. You know, that's awful. Like, it used to be tradition for people to marry 14 or 12-year-olds or whatever. Now we've come to understand that that's wrong. You know, so not all things that are tradition are necessarily good. And the reason why we change them over time is because we start to recognize how destructive they are in all sorts of ways. We evaluate them, right? We morally try to figure out, like, is that right? You know, is that something that really is beneficial for progress, for humanity, for us to connect and, you know, live peacefully amongst differences or different interests or whatever, you know? So I don't agree that tradition is this be-all, end-all deciding factor for things. And it's not a good argument, you know, to say like, oh, well, it's tradition to do it. Well, we got to acknowledge that this is what happened in history, you know. Maybe show appreciation towards the Native American people more on that day as well, while we celebrate with our family. Like, why is that wrong? And as I mentioned, like, because of Tisquantum and him mitigating the situation and having the tribe teach the settlers, you know, how to use the crops and how to like grow corn and all that other stuff. Yeah, it's great to celebrate and give thanks for that opportunity, that was given. Change a little bit about that tradition to like actually show appreciation for people beyond just your family as well, like people put like milk and cookies for Santa to have, right? So why not? He's not part of the family. He brings presents supposedly, right? So why not have something similar like that, like some sort of tradition where it shows appreciation for people who help kickstart things, basically. I think it's up to the younger generation to do that. I don't think that the older generation, forget it. Like, there's absolutely nothing positive that's going to come out from all those that are like resisting progress and are trying to like deny any sort of like critical race theory or good education that like talks about all this like historical stuff that's being swept under the rug. I can't expect anything, but I think it's up to the younger generation to say, well, there are certain traditions that really need to be reevaluated, and how we celebrate and what we focus on. And that doesn't mean it's a great thing. And older generations absolutely hate that, because that contradicts their value or their sense of comfort or whatever else. But remember, you're your own person. You get to decide what sort of values you're going to have. It's your life. And I think, they have to understand that you're not just an extension of them, that you are your own person. So if you choose to see things differently, they shouldn't be forced on you, and you shouldn't have to be penalized for wanting your own perspective and establish your own values and traditions for yourself. That's the only way we can move forward, because a lot of these fascists, basically, they're brainwashing kids. You got these younger generations who are adopting these like racist concepts because their parents are teaching them this stuff. Because we got schools and certain teachers who aren't evaluated or who are evaluated and are led into these institutions to teach kids these awful concepts. Like, there was a teacher that was in Texas that was basically teaching kids that white people are superior to others, and there was like a classroom full of black kids there. It was disgusting. He got fired, as he should. Absolutely, every teacher who does that should. They're not teachers, they're just pawns, basically, or fascist pawns. Nazi fascist pawns that somehow wiggle themselves into institutions or become corrupt themselves. Who knows? But the important thing is they should be removed from education, because that's the antithesis of education. That's perpetuating ignorance and false information. But yeah, that stuff is being perpetuated by older generations. All these lies, all this like corruption and racism and all that stuff, it's not coming from young kids. 13-year-olds, 10-year-olds aren't figuring this out. They're hearing it from adults, from their parents, from other people around. These incredibly ignorant concepts. So it's up to us to really start to use our brain instead of being brainwashed, instead of being told lies, and start doing research, start changing traditions that really favor progress, that really favor truth and, morality. Because you got all these people talking about this stuff like, oh, tradition and so on and so forth. And then they're screaming, oh, I'm Christian, oh, Jesus, blah, 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 blah. Meanwhile, all those values in Christian religions, and most religions say, be a decent person. Don't support racists. Don't support sexists. Don't start spewing hate, or supporting people who are basically saying that ethnic cleansing was a great thing, or that like raping, killing, and pillaging, whatever it is, towns, tribes, whatever, was a good thing. Like, that's the antithesis of like being a religious good person, of like what those religions are telling you to be like. So you could tell that they're just full of shit. They don't know what they're talking about, and they just hate being out of their comfort zone. They hate having to, first of all, absolutely detest recognizing any flaw in their behavior, which is something that I was talking about before in a previous stream, where you start to sweep your problems under the rug. Your personality, or certain traits of your personality, or bad behaviors that you don't address, and you just keep on sweeping under the rug more and more and more. And anytime somebody brings it up, it puts you in this place of like, how, depending on where you've gotten yourself, either aggression, where you get really angry because it's something that I haven't addressed, I don't want you to bring it up, and it's gonna create a lot of problems, it's gonna make me feel insecure, blah 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 blah, and that starts to like spiral into a really crappy behavior. So you bring that up, or you like bring up these concepts, and people get pissed off because of that. Again, it comes from like that insecure place, and they hate the idea that they would have to like work on themselves. Like, I have to start learning about other cultures, I have to start respecting other people, and being considerate or being sensitive. But I'm this like macho, I don't care about anybody but myself and my superiority to others. Like, I'm better than everybody. It's brats, basically. It's just brats. It's a bunch of brats who hate having to do any sort of work on themselves. And people like that end up getting like changing things around or whatever, because they'll stoop to the lowest level to get what they want. They'll do whatever they can to get it. That's what capitalists and fascists do. They don't care about anything other than themselves. So that's a mental disorder. It makes a person sociopathic. They'll step to the lowest low to get more money, to get the laws and regulations that they want. They'll do all sorts of things. That's why you see like Nancy Pelosi's husband getting attacked. They'll step to the lowest point to get things done, and then they'll go and they'll say, I'm Christian, or I'm religious or whatever. They'll incite all sorts of violence and all this other stuff, and then they'll be like, I'm Christian. It's like, no, guy, you're not. You're totally missing the point of it, and you're just lying. You're just using it as a way to like gaslight people to think like, oh, well, they're kind of good. There's something about them that's good. No, they just want to escape any responsibility, and they use that as a way to do it. Just make you think that they are, and then they just go back to doing the same thing next time around, when they get the chance, or when they're confronted about something that they don't want to do. So anyways, just going back, it's up to us as a younger generation to educate ourselves, to be smarter, not more arrogant and dumb, but to be more intelligent and do better than they do. We don't represent them. We don't represent the mistakes that they make. That's their choice. So just going back to that idea of like, people are saying, oh, well, that's a tradition of ours, or that's what we do as this kind of people. Like, well, it's more like that's what you want to do, and you're trying to get everybody else to do it so that you don't have to face the reality of like some of the terrible things that have been done because of these traditions, quote unquote. So yeah, just like talking about that, talking about the real history of what happened in during 1621. Talking about what really happened to the indigenous people. Like some people start to feel anxious because they're like, well, I'm American. And it's like, dude, you're American, but you're not that person who was doing that stuff. So you have nothing to do with that. Yeah, you're you. Even if you have grandparents or whatever, great grandparents who had anything to do with it, it's still not you. So I think it's just kind of absurd that people feel some sort of like responsibility for that. For that past time, as opposed to feeling some sort of responsibility now to like support things towards a progressive direction. And, I think the generalizations go all sorts of ways. It's not just against white people or against black people or against every single, ignorance basically goes to generalizations. People who are ignorant, and that's not a race, that's not a color. Ignorance is a state of mind, right? So I think people really have to start recognizing that and stop labeling things like, oh, that's what Americans did. It's like, well, those are the people at that time, and that's what they did. And they fucked up and they did awful things. They were incredibly ignorant. And that doesn't make anybody else, who's born here, who identifies themselves as that, a participant of that. They have absolutely no time traveling capabilities. But continuing to support it, that's complicit. That's being complicit, and that's wrong. To continue to pretend as if though things were the way they're being forced to believe, that's being complicit. And I think, I think Native American people were very spiritual. They had a great understanding of things, in a different way. They might have the same understanding. They arrived at a lot of things that people have arrived through, like using science in their own method, and they understood it their way. So I think, there's a lot of really interesting, background to their history, to like a lot of the things that they understand and their principles and values. And in fact, the Constitution was based off of, like, if you guys do some research on it, the Constitution was based off of Native Americans, what their values were. It's just some things were like shifted around, changed, and like reworded, etc., etc., Just being a diehard fan of something because of tradition becomes incredibly destructive and stifles any sort of progress as you as a person, not just like as a culture, as a mass. Like as a person, you're not thinking clearly and you're not using your mind clearly. You're just kind of being brainwashed. They use your brain the way everybody else does. But yeah, just like, do a little bit of digging and you'll find that a lot of their principles, their values, depending also like on a tribe and stuff, were very interesting. And you'll find some similarities as well. I'm sure there are tribes that were very ignorant as well, just like anything else. But that's kind of the point, is that, within this like tribalism, people end up finding out, well, there's ignorance all over the place. Like you might think this person's bad and whatever based on their nationality, but look within your own tribalism or your own tribes and you'll find groups that are just as ignorant, which is why it's important to think critically, instead of backing groups that if you dig deep enough you'll figure out like, that's really stupid of them to do or act or say or think or support. And I think the more and more people subscribe to this idea that we're all people, we're human beings living on this planet, and we all have our own interests, and there isn't some sort of like entitlement to anything when it comes to the planet or the resources or whatever. We just have to figure out how to be progressive and share things, establish relationships with people and their differences in a progressive and intellectual way. As opposed to trying to force our way onto others. Like, if you want to adopt a culture because you like it, go for it. You know, if you one day want to, get into like African culture, go for it. The problem becomes when you start forcing other people to do it. That's when the problem really comes, you know, when you're telling people they have to, and that you're smarter and better, and if they don't, then they're going to be wiped out, or they're going to be like removed or whatever. Going back to this painting, just doing all these little folds and trying to blend them all together. I'm going between like getting the general shape of everything to like getting the details. Like, before I jump into the details, I want to make sure things are lined up properly. That everything is angled properly, because there's also that, you know, like the angle of the drapery on his clothes, you know, like that has to be accurate as well. So I'm trying to nail that before spending too much time and then having to find out like, I gotta move this stuff now. Doesn't look right. And I'm actually gonna read more on this Quantum. I'm kind of curious to know what happened to him in Spain, you know, when he was enslaved here and sent over to Spain. I kind of want to know what his journey was and how he managed to get himself back to America. You know, going to Spain, then going to England, and then making his way back to America. I'm kind of curious to know what that story is like. I feel like that's something that would be in like Assassin's Creed or something. And I actually really enjoyed Assassin's Creed 3, which talks about that. It talks about like the American Revolution. It talks about all these tribes. And I think it kind of, now that I think about it, I actually think that there was, that's what it was kind of based off of. Like now that I'm thinking about Connor, I feel like there were some elements, like I don't think it was completely the same story, but there was that point where Connor ends up kind of mitigating things for the settlers and the tribes, and that like he comes back, like he goes away some point and then he comes back and he sees like his entire village has been decimated, and he's trying to find who's responsible for it. And that's what's interesting about Assassin's Creed, is that it kind of shows that, it shows how it's not always an entire group of people that are at fault. There's like a lot of bullshit that goes on in between. There's a lot of lying and manipulating coming from all sorts of people, and people get caught in the middle of all that. They end up getting brainwashed to think one way or another, and indirectly like contributing towards things becoming worse and escalating and so on and so forth. And or not even knowing what the full scope of things are. They're just like told, oh, this is what we're doing here, when really their intention is completely different. Or they'll be like, oh, this tribe, they did these awful things, as a way of trying to like take over the area and establish their own interests. And that's why it's important to think critically, because you don't want to be that person who gets used basically and become like a pawn for these people. And that's what a lot of these cats are. Like there's some of them who are defending these politicians or whatever. None of those politicians would give a shit if that person croaked, if they died, or they were sent over and they didn't survive or whatever else. They'll be like, who cares? They wouldn't care at all whatsoever. You're nothing to them. But this like undying loyalty and oh, he's a savior of our nation and blah blah blah. It's ridiculous. Like those politicians take their taxes, abuse all of that, pocket it, and then they're like, oh, that person's great. It's like, dude, you just made your life worse. You're making less money. You're not able to like thrive, but you're supporting them to do that. Like they're enacting things that are going to make it harder for you to like enjoy your existence. That's what I mean. It's just brainwashed completely. They're not even thinking about like, what is this person really trying to do here, and how is that going to make my life better? For example, one of the most prominent ones was the fuel price gouging that happened. When there was like all the oil problem or whatever. There was like a bill that was passed by Democrats, and basically said that you can't price gouge at gas pumps. That's illegal. You shouldn't be able to do that, especially now considering that people are in the middle of a pandemic. They don't know what's going on. You can't do it. Every single one of those Republicans voted against it. So people who are backing them are complaining about it. It's like, well, the people you're backing are the ones who are making it worse for you. You're basically, doing things in spite yourself. But yeah, you could look up that bill. You could go to congress.gov. You could put in or search for Fuel Price Prevention Act. Fuel Price Gouging Prevention Act, and you'll see every single one of them voted against it. But they continued to blame the other party. They're like, oh, it's them. They haven't fixed anything. Like, people are complaining about gas, and these left people aren't doing anything. Typical gaslighting tactics coming from them. And then then they start talking about Christianity and values and, you know, law and order. Meanwhile, they avoid all of it, and they dodge it as much as possible because they're bullshitters. They're bullshit artists. They don't mean any of the things they say. The only thing they care about is money and power. So they'll step to the lowest level to get it. That's what I was talking about before. And another reason why it's important to think for yourself, so you don't become their pawn. Like, a lot of these people they're like complaining about fuel prices and saying, oh, it's skyrocketed and so expensive. Guess what? The people you voted for are doing it. They're making your life worse. But because of this group mentality, because of, you know, this sense of loyalty that people have without thinking about it, they just continue to make their own life more miserable, which doesn't make any sense. It's like if a murderer gave him $100 and said, well, you know, you're going to have to vote for me, they'll do it. It's like, where's your morality there? You know, where are your Christian values there? And principles and all that other stuff? Like, just because somebody did that means you should be supporting them? No. They did something awful, regardless of what they've done for you in the past or whatever. If they're going to do that awful thing, especially something like that, you know, if they're a murderer or if they're a rapist or whatever, no. You don't support them. That's not where loyalty lies. You know, it should be towards people who really are continuing to do things proper. It's just not an excuse. Like, it's not an excuse to continue to do awful things. And that's such a manipulation tactic. Like, oh, let me just give this person some money and then they'll have to vote for me, even though, like, I'm inciting a war. I'm, like, inciting sexism and racism and, you know, doing all these terrible things. Or the person's a kitty diddler and, you know, whatever else. Like, oh, well, they did give me like $1,000, or they did, you know, do this for me, so I guess it's okay that they do that. You know, I'm gonna continue to support them. That's insane. That's crazy. And it's really stupid. Like, that's what really dumb people would do. If we don't take it upon ourselves to, like, change the trajectory of these things, they're just going to get worse and worse, and it's going to perpetuate. It's going to be the same problems over and over again. That's what I mean. And it's really up to the younger generation to say, hey, I'm not going to continue that, and I'm not going to just back things because of this this net, basically, this trap of quote-unquote loyalty when you guys are doing awful, atrocious things. We got to stop the old generation's garbage, basically, that they're trying to force you to adopt. And they do it because they just don't want to feel bad about their actions. If I can convince people to do what I'm doing, then I have nothing to atone for. I have nothing to feel bad about. It's true. Everybody's following it. Everybody's agreeing with it, so I'm right. That's really where it comes from. A lot of times. I think that's why things haven't really changed a lot in history, because there were a lot of enablers. There were people who were complicit, or they were just like, oh, well, this person is giving me a job, so I'm going to continue on doing these awful things. You got these soldiers who are going out and murdering people because that's what they've been told to do, as opposed to just being like, that's wrong, that's crazy, there has to be better ways of dealing with this. Have you tried improving education systems and paying teachers well? Have you tried restructuring requirements for teachers and having certain standards changed around? Have you done any of that? No? That hasn't been done. You see all these education institutions, what are they doing? Not paying teachers well, defunding them, pocketing the money. There were schools that were closed down in certain areas that really needed them because it saved the district $1.2 million. So they closed it. The district closed it so that they could save more money. And you guys can look at that up. That's a well-known thing that happens. But then they'll incite a war because they're like, oh, these people are ignorant, or these people are blah, blah, blah. It's absolute bullshit. It's just ways for them to figure out how they could exploit and get more for themselves and their agendas. That's really where it's all about. And with that, ladies and gents, with that very long political rant, I think it makes sense for the occasion, really. I hope you guys do a little research about it. Read about Tisquantum. Read about that story. It's pretty interesting. It's an interesting part of history. And be an independent thinker. Use that mind, that wonderful, amazing brain of yours. Use it for yourself, and stay informed. Stay sane. Don't buy into all these like old generation problems that they're perpetuating and forcing on you. Be your own person. Think about it for yourself before adopting it. And I'll see you guys tomorrow. Tomorrow is going to be a special stream, actually. Tomorrow is going to be a special intro. I'm going to continue on with Gil Elfgren. I'm excited about it. I'm going to be introducing you guys to a new artist that inspired Gil Elfgren, and in fact inspired a lot of artists as well. Can't wait to start talking about their work, to show you their beautiful paintings. Probably this is where I'm getting this like drive to do this painting, to work on this painting, from talking about all that stuff. So yeah, that's going to be tomorrow. That's going to be at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So there's still going to be figure drawing basics at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then at 9, I'm going to be streaming the special intro. So make sure you tune in then. And as always, if you guys enjoy this content, just remember to hit that like and subscribe button. Thanks for tuning in, everybody, and I hope you enjoy celebrating with beloved ones.